As you no doubt know, whether you watched them for yourself or paid any attention to other fans online, these two episodes were a rough watch. It took me a little longer than usual to get to these episodes, and after seeing the online reactions throughout the day, I was very concerned coming into the episodes because I knew something bad was going to happen, but I don't think I could have mentally prepared myself for just how bad things have gotten. We start off at a new location where we're introduced to a mother and her child, and initially I was a bit confused by this opening scene and how it was supposed to connect to everything. But give it a little time, and everything makes sense once we learn that the child is force sensitive. This puts a target on the kid, especially when one of the citizens nearby sends out a call for bounty hunters, which ties into the M-Count bounties mentioned earlier in the season. With how much of the series is focused on the Bad Batch and the Empire, I really liked how this one scene showed us more of the average citizen within the Empire, and how they are willing to give each other up for a bit of money. Later on, when we pick back up with this part of the story, the mother and child are still together at home. With the way she reacted to her child throwing the vase with the Force, it seemed as though she was aware of his abilities already, but she doesn't seem to see it as much of a target on whatever backwater world they're on, because she's still there when Cad Bane arrives. It definitely took me longer than it should have to recognize his boots, but I found his role to be a bit underwhelming. It totally fits with the character, kidnapping young, Force-sensitive children for Palpatine's grand schemes, but he didn't have as much to do as I would have thought. It was still nice for him to be brought back one final time in the last season, but I was sort of surprised that he didn't have a larger role to play. We do get a Toto appearance, which was very nice to see, and then they bring in a crib for the child, and that instantly screamed Grogu to me. At first it just seemed like a darker parallel to when we first saw Grogu in The Mandalorian, but after thinking about it more, I think we could 100% see Grogu introduced briefly in these final episodes in a similar manner. His midichlorian account would make him a prime target for the Empire and Hemlock's experiments, and if the Bad Batch are able to rescue him between when he's captured and then delivered to the Empire on Tantus, it would explain why he has the pram that he rides in. The rest of Episode 10 focuses extensively on Tantus, as Kar is promoted to the new Chief Scientist and introduced to much of Project Necromancer for the first time. But before I get to that, I wanted to briefly talk about when we first see Hemlock. He's looking at a container, which looks to be a different one than the ones we saw in Palpatine's vault earlier in the premiere. We aren't shown what it is, but the datapad looks to be something along the lines of another Clone X, so this could be where they're kept in stasis before activation, which would explain the loads of equipment in the same room. However, when we later see Hemlock in his office, after he contacts Tarkin, who's impatient about the funds being diverted towards Tantus, Hemlock contacts the Clone X who we saw fail on Teth. While he's doing this, he has these soldier prototype designs that he keeps looking at, and to me it looked to be different enough from the Clone X design where it got me thinking about Dark Troopers. We saw them in The Mandalorian, which has seen a lot of the same references as the Bad Batch, and while talking to Clone X, Hemlock mentions that the other operatives aren't ready yet, so all he has to work with is the typical Commandos and TK Troopers. It sounds like the Clone X's could have been created with the intent in mind to lead the Dark Troopers, which we may see by the end of the season. The Clone X also sounded a lot more like Cody than Tech to me in the brief moments where he spoke in these episodes, but there still wasn't any concrete evidence going either way. Anyways, going back to earlier in the episode, we learn a lot more about Project Necromancer as Dr. Kar is brought up to date. Because Nalase's imprisonment is negatively impacting research, Kar proposes that she become the new Chief Scientist, given that she's been there for years, to which Hemlock accepts pretty easily. We get a lot of these small tidbits of information on Kar throughout the episode, enough where it got me very interested in her backstory and where she goes from here, but there still wasn't anything major revealed yet. As she gets fed more information on Project Necromancer, we as an audience get it spoon-fed to us as well. Hemlock references the assets in the sub-level containment chamber, which I assume refers to the imprisoned clones, and she's also given access to the vault. Although they enter through the same safety precautions, the white room they arrive in is starkly different from the black and red chamber that Hemlock took Palpatine to. Although it's possible that these children, or specimens as Hemlock refers to them as, were the subjects kept within those tubes, it isn't confirmed or made clear in any way, so I do hope we get some clarification on that sometime soon. That vault could still be above the pay grade of Kar, but I do expect to get that information before the end of the season. Upon entering the vault, Kar is introduced to the 3 children kept there, all for their high M counts. One of the first things to pop into my mind was a program to develop future Inquisitors, I think because it sort of reminded me of a few images I'd seen in the comics, but I doubt that'll be the case here. Hemlock explains to Kar why children are being used, citing that they are more unaware, and that there are a few adults left with such characteristics, thanks to the Purge. We also learn more about why Omega was so vital to the experimentation on Tantus. Rather than being Force-sensitive, we learn that her blood is the only binder that's proven to be compatible with the DNA to recreate M-count levels, since they can't be directly replicated from the source. So rather than her being a Force-sensitive clone, It sounds like she just has special blood, meaning a lot of what happened before was a major misdirect. As we continue to see Car meet the three children, two of them which we learn are named Eva and Jax. One of the most interesting parts of it all was seeing Car's internal battle between her duty to the Empire and her own compassion. As the episode goes on, she's slowly unable to hide her need to do good, becoming friendly with the kids, learning their names, caring for them, wanting to find a way to free them. Although Hemlock dehumanizes the children to nothing more than scientific assets, Car is simply not able to do that. Even after SP-32, or Jax, tries to escape, she does her best to handle the situation peacefully, contrasted by the clones coming in forcefully and stunning the kid. It's incredibly harsh how the Empire is treating these children, and all they want is to be free and go home. Car goes to Nala Se to ease her conscience a bit and learn more about this situation, and here we learn only small details about Car, but in the moment they still felt like massive revelations. Car mentions that something happened to her as a child, and that she was discarded by Nala Se, so there is a history between them that has created this resentment in Car towards the Kaminoan. There's a rich backstory to Car, and we've only barely gotten the surface of it. Later, when Car learns of another child being brought in, she wants to go with to retrieve it. Although the child ends up being brought to Tantus all the same, the effort that Car put in and the questions that she kept asking, commenting on how young the kid is, wanting to test it herself, felt as though she was looking for any reason to go against orders and turn the child down, sending her back to her family. Although Car didn't show many signs of humanity towards Omega, this episode created a stark contrast between Car and the other Imperials, making her eventual desertion from the Empire even more likely. This episode ends with Car giving Omega's straw doll to Eva, and it feels like she might be able to empathize with what they're going through, depending on whatever happened to her when she was young. Although we haven't spent much time with Car throughout the series, this episode did a lot to make me invested in her story going forward. While the first episode was very Tantus heavy, the second episode focused almost entirely on the Bad Batch. The episode starts off with a brief scene of Fi arriving on an asteroid to fill up her tank. At first it reminded me a bit of Polis Massa, but there wasn't any indication over where this location actually was, although it is a place frequently visited by Fi. Clone X is able to locate her while she's refueling and hack into the Navi computer for Pabu's location. Given how easily Ventress supposedly found Pabu last episode, I was surprised that this was the route Clone X took. I guess Ventress could have gone to a few people, Sid, Fi, figured out where the batch was located, maybe used the Force or her lightsaber to persuade them a bit, but it wasn't what I was expecting at least. When we pick back up with the batch on Pabu, it looks as though Ventress's warning really got to them, as they're packing all of their gear up to leave Pabu as soon as possible. Whether or not they completely trusted Ventress, they recognized her skill and competence, so they took her warning to heart and almost immediately prepared to change hideouts. Omega leaves her Tuca doll and Tech's goggles behind with Liana, who promises to keep them safe, and to me that was almost complete confirmation that something was going to happen in this episode, like the hut being destroyed or burned, that would have destroyed these special objects. But surprisingly, nothing happens in the end. Because of what I had heard coming into this episode, and what we had seen in the promotional footage, I was constantly on edge for most of this episode, because I knew bad things were coming. I knew the Empire was going to arrive in numbers, I knew the Marauder was going to get blown up, which made it hurt even more so seeing them load everything they have onto it. Like I knew what was inevitably going to happen, and yet I couldn't stop it. Clone X arrives on Pabu, and something that really caught my attention was how sloppy the soldier is. Although he failed last time on Teth, I wouldn't consider any of his actions overtly sloppy, but here, they were made about as obvious as possible, between him setting off the alarm while accessing Fi's ship, and then not applying his cloaking device and nearly being discovered arriving on Pabu. There's got to be something there, but I'm not sure why they're making such a big deal about this. Hunter senses bad things coming, and I liked the way we got to see more of his ability here. It really feels like it's been sidelined or hardly used recently, but his awareness, almost akin to Force sensitivity, is what interests me the most about the batch's special mutations. The Marauder gets blown up, and maybe it was because I found myself pausing a lot to take notes for this review, but to me it didn't feel like there was a big enough build-up. It should have or could have been one of those devastating moments, and the music did all that it could to instill these emotions in me, but it still felt too early in the episode to be too concerned, because I knew so much worse was going to happen. Things quickly ramp up after this. An entire Star Destroyer arrives with TKs and commandos. Hunter orders the young clones back into the fight to help, which was small but very meaningful. They were displaced soldiers who had found a normal life on Pabu. We saw them briefly at the beginning of this episode living a happy and normal life, and then things become chaotic and they're soldiers again, like they can't escape who they were made to be. The Empire takes over the island like we've seen them do to other planets before in the series, and there were just so many Imperials that it felt impossible for this episode to not have a bad ending. There were also a lot of things happening here that, whether or not Omega is Force sensitive in the end, reminded me a lot of a Jedi. She feels guilty for everything the Empire is doing, and blames herself for the destruction the Empire causes. They're harassing villagers, and they're going to burn the homes, using the Batch's goodwill against them. And in the end it works, because it gets bad enough where Omega decides to give herself up. Hunter is unable to steal a gunship, although him being a one-man show was neat for the brief scene. And Omega can't keep hiding because the Empire knows she's there, and will continue to hurt the villagers until she's found. She wants to spare Pabu and get taken back to Tansis to find the coordinates, but Crosshair doesn't want to lose her again. She's being very selfless and Jedi-like here, and it caught me a bit off guard because she's definitely the more mature one in the scene, and she is older. But the visuals of how the two characters compare versus where they actually are in their lives threw me for a bit of a loop. The next major concern for me became whether or not Crosshair would be able to make the shot and attach the beacon to the ship. At first because of his hand, but then once he's attacked, the beacon falls short as he rushes to make the shot, meaning that they have no way to find Omega once again. She is going to have to make something happen on Tansis on her own, likely through the help of Dr. Carr, or the Batch are going to have to go out looking for more information on where Tansis is, so far which they've been unable to find. What did you think of these episodes of The Bad Batch? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like the video, and subscribe for coverage of The Bad Batch as a new episode premieres every week, and remember to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you. Always.